I never meant for anyone to read it. That's the thing about journals, right? They're supposed to be private, sacred even. A place where you can be completely honest with yourself without fear of judgment or consequences. But life has a way of exposing our secrets when we least expect it, and mine got exposed on a random Tuesday afternoon in October. My name is Adrian, and I've been keeping journals since I was 16. I'm 24 now, and I have a stack of them in my closet, chronicling everything from awkward high school crushes to quarter-life existential crises. The current one, though, the one that mattered, was always with me. Dark blue leather cover, pages already worn from constant use. I wrote in it almost every night before bed, processing my day, my feelings, my confusion about things I wasn't ready to say out loud. The biggest thing I wasn't ready to say out loud was how I felt about my roommate, Theo. Theo moved in 6 months ago. I'd posted an ad looking for someone to split rent on my 2-bedroom apartment in the city, and he was the first person who responded. When he showed up for the viewing, I remember opening the door and feeling like someone had knocked the wind out of me. He had this easy smile, dark hair that fell just slightly into his eyes, and this presence that made the whole apartment feel warmer somehow. We clicked immediately, talking for 2 hours about everything from our favourite movies to our completely opposite coffee preferences. He moved in a week later. Living with Theo was effortless. He was considerate, funny, and had this way of making even mundane things like grocery shopping feel like an adventure. We fell into this comfortable rhythm where we'd cook dinner together a few nights a week, watch movies on the couch, and stay up too late talking about nothing and everything. He worked as a graphic designer from home, and I was doing marketing for a tech startup, so we'd often find ourselves both working at the kitchen table, occasionally looking up to share a meme or complain about a difficult client. The problem was that somewhere along the way, probably around month 2, I started noticing things I shouldn't have been noticing. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed. How he'd absently run his hand through his hair when he was concentrating. The sound of his voice in the morning still rough with sleep. The way he'd touch my shoulder when he passed behind me in the kitchen. Small things. Constant things. Things that were driving me absolutely insane. I dated women in college, had a couple of serious relationships even, but they'd always felt like I was going through the motions. Like I was playing a part I'd been assigned. With Theo, everything felt different, more real, more terrifying. Because falling for your straight male roommate is possibly the worst idea in the history of bad ideas, and I was doing it anyway. Writing about it every night in my journal like that would somehow make the feelings more manageable. It didn't. The entries started innocent enough. Just observations about my day, mentions of funny things Theo said. But they evolved into pages and pages of me trying to understand what I was feeling, trying to talk myself out of it. Failing spectacularly. I wrote about the night we stayed up until 3 a.m. talking about our families and how badly I wanted to reach across the couch and take his hand. I wrote about the time he made me soup when I was sick, and how that simple gesture made me feel more cared for than I'd felt in years. I wrote about the growing realization that I wasn't just attracted to him, I was falling in love with him, and how absolutely terrified that made me. The journal was my safety valve. As long as those feelings stayed on the page, I could maintain the friendship. I could keep things normal, I could pretend everything was fine. Then came that Tuesday in October. I'd left for work that morning in a rush, running late for a meeting. My journal was on my nightstand where I'd left it the night before, and in my hurry, I didn't think twice about it. Why would I? Theo had never gone into my room. We respected each other's privacy. It was an unspoken rule. But that afternoon, Theo texted me. "Hey, the ceiling in your room is leaking. Pipe burst in the apartment above us. Had to move some of your stuff to keep it dry. Maintenance is here now." I felt my stomach drop. I texted back asking if everything was okay, and he said it was under control, but I spent the rest of the day distracted, anxious. Not about the leak. About what might have been moved. About what might have been seen. When I got home that evening, Theo was in the kitchen making pasta. He looked up when I came in, gave me that same easy smile he always did. "Hey, crisis averted. The maintenance guy fixed the pipe. There's some water damage to your ceiling, but nothing major. I moved your nightstand and some books. Hope that's okay." My heart was pounding. "Yeah, of course, thanks for dealing with that." "No problem," he said, turning back to the stove. His voice was normal, everything about him was normal. I stood there for a moment, then went to my room. Everything had been moved away from the area under the leak. My nightstand was against the opposite wall, my books were stacked neatly on my desk, and my journal was sitting on top of my dresser, closed, exactly where it shouldn't have been. I picked it up with shaking hands. There was no bookmark, no indication that it had been opened, but it had been on my nightstand, under the leak. Theo would have had to move it. Would he have opened it? Would he have read it? The thought made me feel physically sick. I went back to the kitchen, trying to keep my voice casual. "Thanks for moving my stuff, I really appreciate it." "Yeah, of course," Theo said, not looking up from the pasta he was stirring. "Dinner will be ready in like 10 minutes if you're hungry." I watched him carefully, looking for any sign that something was different, any indication that he knew. But there was nothing. He was just Theo, making dinner like he did 3 nights a week, completely normal. Over the next few days, I was a wreck. I analysed every interaction, every word, every glance. But Theo didn't change. He was the same as he'd always been. Friendly, warm, easy to be around. We had our usual movie night that Friday. We went to the farmer's market on Saturday morning like we did most weekends. He made fun of me for buying too much expensive cheese. I made fun of him for his obsession with weird, artisanal hot sauces. Everything was exactly the same, except it wasn't. Not for me, because I couldn't stop thinking about that journal, about the possibility that he'd read it, about what that meant. I'd written his name so many times. I'd described moments we'd shared in embarrassing detail. I'd confessed feelings I'd never said out loud to anyone. If he'd read it, he knew everything. And if he knew everything and was acting like nothing had changed, what did that mean? Was he uncomfortable but being polite? Was he pretending he hadn't read it? Or had he genuinely not opened it? The uncertainty was torture. A week went by. Then 2. Life continued. We fell back into our rhythm, but I was constantly on edge, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for him to bring it up, to move out, to create distance between us. But he didn't. If anything, he seemed more present, more attentive. Little things started happening that I couldn't quite explain. He'd make my coffee in the morning exactly how I liked it without me asking. He started suggesting movies I'd mentioned wanting to see in passing. He'd text me random things during the day that made me laugh. One night, we were watching a show on the couch, and he shifted closer, our shoulders touching, and he just stayed there. Didn't move away. I didn't know what to make of it. My anxiety was mixing with something else, something that felt dangerously like hope. 3 weeks after the leak, on a Friday night, we were both home with no plans. Theo suggested we order pizza and have a movie night. We'd done this dozens of times, but that night felt different somehow. There was an energy in the air I couldn't name. We were on the couch, half watching some action movie neither of us was really invested in. I was acutely aware of how close he was sitting, how I could feel the warmth of him next to me. My journal was in my room, but it felt like it was right there between us, this invisible thing we both knew about but weren't acknowledging. "Adrian," Theo said suddenly, and something in his tone made my heart stop. He wasn't looking at the TV anymore. He was looking at me. "Yeah?" My voice came out quieter than I intended. He was quiet for a moment, like he was choosing his words carefully. "Can I ask you something?" This was it. Whatever this was, it was happening. "Sure." "That day with the leak," he started, and I felt my whole body tense. "I had to move your journal. It was right under where the water was coming down. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, just waited." "I didn't mean to," he continued, his voice soft. "But when I picked it up, it fell open, and I saw my name. I know I should have just closed it immediately, should have respected your privacy, but I—" He paused, running a hand through his hair in that way he did when he was nervous. "I read some of it, not all of it, just a few pages, and I've been trying to figure out how to bring it up ever since." The world felt like it was tilting. "Theo, let me finish," he said gently. "Please." I nodded, unable to form words anyway. "I read about how you feel, about me, about us, and I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to figure out if I was reading too much into it, if I was seeing what I wanted to see." He shifted to face me fully, and the look in his eyes was something I'd never seen before. Vulnerable, open, scared. "Because the thing is, Adrian, I've been feeling the same way." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "What?" "I like you," he said, and there was this small, nervous smile playing at his lips. "I've liked you for months. I just didn't think you felt the same way. You'd mentioned dating women, and I didn't want to make things weird or mess up what we had, so I just tried to be your friend and told myself that was enough. My mind was reeling. You like me? Yeah, he said, and he laughed a little, with this soft, disbelieving sound. I really do. And reading those pages, seeing that maybe you felt the same way, it's been driving me crazy not knowing if I should say something or just pretend I never saw it. I can't believe this is happening, I said, and I realized my hands were shaking. I've been terrified for 3 weeks that you read it and were just being nice until you could figure out how to move out. Move out? Theo looked genuinely shocked. Adrian, why would I move out? Because I basically filled 50 pages with how I'm in love with my roommate who I thought was straight and completely out of my league. The words hung in the air between us, and I realized too late what I'd just said. Not like. Love. I'd said love. Theo's expression softened into something that made my chest ache. You think I'm out of your league? That's what you're focusing on right now? Well, it's ridiculous, he said, and he reached out, his hand finding mine on the couch between us. His fingers were warm, slightly calloused, real. You're brilliant and funny and kind, and you make the apartment feel like home. You're definitely not the one who should be worried about leagues here. I looked down at our hands, at the way his fingers were laced through mine like they belonged there. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Theo said quietly. But I need you to know that I didn't say anything these past few weeks because I was trying to respect your privacy. I felt guilty for reading something so personal, and I didn't want you to feel exposed or pressured. I wanted to give you space to decide if and when you wanted to tell me yourself. That's why you've been so normal. I've been trying to be normal, he corrected with a small laugh. I've actually been losing my mind a little bit, trying to figure out how to show you that I care without being obvious about why I was suddenly being more attentive. Apparently, I'm not great at subtle. I couldn't help but smile. You made my coffee every morning. You take it with way too much sugar and that weird vanilla creamer. Of course I made your coffee. And you suggested all those movies I mentioned. Because I pay attention when you talk, he said simply. I always have. Something in my chest cracked open. All the fear and anxiety of the past 3 weeks was draining away, being replaced by something else, something that felt like possibility. So what happens now? I asked. Theo squeezed my hand gently. I think that's up to you. We can take this as slow as you want. We can just sit with it for a while. Or... He trailed off, his thumb brushing across my knuckles in a way that sent electricity up my arm. Or, I prompted. Or I could kiss you, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. If that's something you'd want. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the vulnerability in his eyes, the nervous set of his shoulders, the way he was holding his breath waiting for my answer. This was Theo, my roommate, my friend, the person I'd been falling in love with for months, writing about in secret, convinced it was impossible. I'd want that, I said. He smiled, this beautiful, relieved smile, and then he was leaning in, and I was meeting him halfway, and then we were kissing. His lips were soft and warm, and his free hand came up to cup my jaw, gentle and sure. It was nothing like I'd imagined in all those journal entries. It was better, real, happening. When we pulled back, we were both a little breathless. Theo rested his forehead against mine, still smiling. I've wanted to do that for so long, he murmured. Me too, I admitted. I have like 20 journal entries about imagining what it would be like to kiss you. He laughed, and the sound vibrated through me. Can I read them sometime? Absolutely not, I said, but I was laughing too. Those are staying private forever. You've already read more than enough. Fair enough, he said, pulling back just enough to look at me properly. But maybe you could tell me about them instead. I want to know everything, all the things you were too scared to say out loud. And so I did. We stayed on that couch for hours, talking in a way we never had before. I told him about when I first realized I had feelings for him, about all the small moments that had added up to something I couldn't ignore. He told me about his side of things, about how he'd been trying to work up the courage to say something for weeks before the leak happened, about how reading my journal had felt like being given permission to hope. We talked about what this meant, about the fact that we lived together and worked from home and would be navigating this relationship in close quarters. We talked about taking things slow, about being honest with each other, about the fact that we were both a little scared but willing to try. As the night stretched into early morning, we moved from the couch to his room, just to lie next to each other and keep talking. There was something surreal about it, about being this close to him, about the way he'd absently play with my fingers while we talked, about how natural it all felt. "Can I ask you something?" I said as the first light of dawn started filtering through his window. "Anything," Theo said. "When you read my journal, what page did it fall open to?" He was quiet for a moment and I felt him shift beside me. "It was the entry from about a month ago. The one where you wrote about us staying up late talking about our families. You wrote about wanting to hold my hand." I cringed slightly. "That's embarrassing." "No," he said firmly, turning to face me. "It wasn't. It was honest and vulnerable and beautiful. And it made me realize that maybe I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did. That maybe this thing between us was real." "It is real," I said softly. "Yeah," he agreed. And he leaned in to kiss me again, slow and sweet. "It really is." The next few weeks were an adjustment period, but not in the way I'd feared. Instead of things being awkward, they were just different. Better. We still had our routines, still cooked dinner together and watched movies and worked at the kitchen table. But now there were other things too. Stolen kisses while making coffee. Falling asleep together on the couch. The way he'd come up behind me while I was working and wrap his arms around me, pressing a kiss to my temple. We told our friends gradually. Most of them weren't surprised. Apparently we'd been obvious for months, and everyone had just been waiting for us to figure it out. My best friend from college said she'd known I was into him from the first time I mentioned his name. Theo's sister said she could tell from the way he talked about me. We'd been the last ones to know. I still keep my journal. Still write in it almost every night. But the entries are different now. Instead of pages of confusion and longing, they're full of gratitude and wonder. I write about the way Theo kisses me goodbye before I leave for the office, about how he leaves little notes around the apartment for me to find, about the night he told me he loved me for the first time, 3 months after that conversation on the couch, his voice shaking slightly with the vulnerability of it. I write about how it feels to be loved by someone who knows all of me, even the parts I tried to keep hidden, how it feels to come home to someone who feels like home. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if that pipe had never burst, if my journal had stayed on my nightstand, if Theo had never read those pages. Would we have eventually figured it out on our own? Or would we have stayed in that comfortable limbo forever, both too scared to risk what we had? I don't know. What I do know is that sometimes the things we're most afraid of exposing are the things that set us free. That vulnerability, even when it's forced, even when it's terrifying, can lead to something beautiful. My journal was supposed to be private, a place where I could be honest without consequences. But maybe the consequence of honesty isn't always what we fear. Maybe sometimes it's exactly what we need. A catalyst, a confession, a bridge between what is and what could be. Theo found my journal and never said a word about what he read. Not for 3 weeks. Not until he was ready to say something that mattered. And in that silence, in that space he gave me, he showed me more respect and care than I knew was possible. I'm grateful for the leak. For the accident that exposed my secret. For the courage it gave both of us to stop pretending and start living honestly. Because this, what we have now, is worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. Every vulnerable word written on those pages led me here, to him, to us, to this life we're building together. And that's a story worth writing about.